Yeah, you can start. You can start the
Yeah.
interview now. Now you've called me old off camera. That's great.
All right. I'm start laughing. This is Fred Beck from Fred Talks IT. Today I'm very lucky we're joined by Tris Dixon. So thank you very much for coming on, Tris. It's good to see you, mate.
Fred, thanks for having me. Like I said, you called me old off camera. I'm not sure that's the way forward to start with these interviews, but hey, maybe maybe I'm just in denial.
That's exactly why I started the interview now rather than 2 minutes ago. So I look on Amazon, your book's out now. It's got quite a few five-star reviews. It's called Damage, the Untold Story of Brain Trauma in Boxing. Now, I kind of feel that brain trauma is kind of the elephant in the room in boxing, the thing that no one really wants to address. Because in a way, boxing is a victim of their own success in a way, because everyone loves knockouts. Then knockouts don't really help the brain, do they? So, what can you tell us about this book then?
Really, in terms of it being the elephant in the room, we're looking at what the book looks at is the long term consequences of boxing. So it's not about the short term stuff of the worst case scenario, what might happen on fight night, which is what people call acute injuries of what happens on the night of a fight. We're looking at chronic stuff, and that's the relation of accumulated blows to the head and links with Alzheimer, dementias, Parkinson's, and obviously CTE. And CTE is what was originally coined punch drunk syndrome back in 1928. It's the same thing that the American footballers have been suffering with in more recent years, and that's come to light. And so it was. I've saw the link between CTE and boxing, and looked into it further. And obviously, it turns out that it was boxing's own problem in the first place with punch drunk syndrome. And basically, what CTE is over through the course of time, if you suffer a lot of brain trauma and a lot of hit bangs to the head, basically, there's a buildup of what's called tau protein in the brain, and it starts basically killing brain cells in layman's terms. And obviously, it then starts to affect cognitive functions such as tremors and how you walk and how you speak, but also behavioral problems. And it has links with impulsivity, depression, decision making, and that kind of stuff. So that's what I'm looking at. I'm not looking at what happens on fight night or the acute stuff or deaths or stuff like that. I'm looking at what happens to these guys when they retire, walk off into the sunset, and then what might happen. So that's kind of what it's about.
And do you think there's more kind of brain damage occurring in the heavier weight classes, or do you kind of feel it depends on the boxer's style in the ring?
No, I think if you're a good boxer, you take less punishment, don't you? And I think it's probably to do. I can't say it's just to do with styles, because when you look at fighters like Muhammad Ali, although he did get hit more in the second half of his career, but certainly defensive guys like Wilfred Benitez and Willie Pep, they suffered neurologically down the line. And Pep was meant to be, the master boxer of all time. And Nicolino Loach struggled down the line, and Wilfred Benitez was called the radar because no one could hit him. And then Harold Graham, another guy that people said they couldn't hit, and he's obviously wound up in a psychiatric ward, saying that his trauma was, saying that the brain trauma he received caused him to wind up where he was when I interviewed him for the book. So no, I don't think it's specific to the weight classes, because you see these guys have been affected all the way across the board. Fred, let me ask you something. So what's the dream for you, mate? What's the dream job for you? Where do you want to be in 10 years time, 15 years time?
Right now, I box as an amateur, but I don't really see because I'm okay. I'm not like brilliant or anything, but hopefully no one watches this from the gym. But so I doubt I'll be turning as a pro. So I thought, oh, I've always thought like the idea of having your own YouTube channel, you see, kind of being your own boss. So my good mate Louis hid his own channel. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna make my own YouTube channel, right? So then I thought, so Raging of Boxing interviews. So then I interviewed my old boxing coach, Harvey Morgan. I did Harlem Eubank, Lyndon Arthur. And then I struck gold with Conor McGregor's coach, John Kavanagh. I was very lucky with that one. I've
How
always
did you
thought,
get him? How did you get John Kavanagh?
I sent him a DM on Instagram.
Okay.
He does see it. I don't want to say this, so he'll very get annoyed, but he does see if he's DM, he will see it. He reads all his DMs. But he always
Okay.
posts it on his story. But I always thought doing the post-fight interviews in the ring, that's kind of the dream, That'd be
Okay.
quite nice to
But
do.
Andy Scott at Sky has got your job.
Yeah, but Sky, match with just less Sky, you see.
No, but Andy's a Sky guy, so he will stay there, I'm sure. But Andy, so this is it's funny because you've obviously messaged me, slid into my DMs for this interview, and Andy was emailing me years ago to work when I was at Boxing News. And I remember him saying he's got some video skills and different things. And I don't know that we did anything with him at the time, but we were certainly moving into a more digital way. And it was just hard to break into the business. I think he wound up doing some work for Frank Maloney at the time, who's now obviously Kelly Maloney. And I always remember Andy just was very polite. And, not everyone who applied for work at Boxing News, sort of stayed in my mind, but Andy did, because he was clearly a quality individual who brought something new to the table, and obviously he's done really well for himself. So he wrote to me for a job at Boxing News 11 or so years ago, and now he's doing the post-fight interviews and getting in the firing line with AJ and all the rest of it. And if you saw his interview with AJ after Pulev, I'm not sure if you've seen that one, but it's worth watching if you haven't, because I don't think AJ is Andy's biggest fan. But you got to ask these guys the tough questions. It's tough. It's funny, writing that book as well, Damage, there's an interesting part to that, in the sense that in sports, right, it's particularly in the NFL, if anyone seems to suffer a concussion, they're not allowed to speak to the media afterwards, in case they say something erratic or something out there. And boxing hasn't really had that. If you're still expected to speak to the media. I remember firstly when Amir Khan was knocked out by Bradis Prescott, and I'll always give Amir a lot of credit for this, but he went out and faced the media afterwards. And I'm not sure he should have done, although I don't remember him saying anything outlandish apart from got caught and stuff. Also, in more recent history, if you look at Tony Bellew when he was knocked out by Usyk, there was a lot of repetition in his post-fight interview, and he was clearly concussed, and he should have been taken away. But there was a lot of, he should never have been allowed to speak to the media. I think he did TV, radio, and God knows what else before he was actually seen by someone, by a specialist or someone who knew what they were doing properly. So I think it's an interesting job, that. And I think I was pleased to see when Josh Warrington lost to Maurizio Lara more recently, he was clearly in a bad way, and they didn't allow him to stick around and speak to the media. And it should be, having with a media background, obviously, like any other journalist, you want your pound of flesh, but being a boxing person, you want the guys to be looked after, and that should be the first thing. First things first, check the guys out, make sure they're okay. So I think it's an interesting position, that Andy's in and all the others are in. And I think TV network executives need to look closely at what they're doing and what they're putting out in terms of exposing these guys directly after a fight, particularly a hard one, or if they've been knocked out.
I mean, I remember Josh Warrington, you mentioned his loss to Lara there. I remember he put his YouTube channel and he put a video out, I think it was the next day, it was like 2 minutes explaining the fight. Then it was taken down after about 4 hours. So very clearly wasn't in the right way, really.
Yeah, we've spoken about that. I've just done a podcast with him. It'll go up in the next couple of weeks. And he spoke about that. He wasn't happy with the way he was sounding because he had a swollen lip. So it sounded like he was slurring and different things. So he wasn't. He didn't think it sort of accurately reflected where he was. So, yeah, interesting. These guys, and, 24 hours on from something like that, your head's probably still not clear. It's probably still not where it needs to be. Even if, as a boxer, you'll be telling yourself, no, I'm fine.
And you have your YouTube channel, I think it's Boxing Life Stories. So how I get in contact with people? I always get comments or maybe a few DMs asking this. I won't really go through. I've had some. I won't go through Matchroom Boxing or BT Sport or the media there because it just takes so long. So I'll just DM them on Instagram, or if they got a website, I send them an email. Or maybe if they got a manager, I'll send the manager a DM or email. But how do you get in contact with them? Because you've had Barry Hearn, Sonny Edwards, Pat Barrett. You've had loads of legends on your show.
If you stick with this for 25 years, right, which is because I started a similar age to you, in 25 years, you'll probably have a whole contacts book of numbers. So that's just the way it goes. You do what you're doing and you got to stick with it. And that's the hardest thing, Fred, to be honest, is, I've just put something on Instagram. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but around the ages of 20 to 24, I was traveling a lot around America trying to get a break in boxing. And that was 4 years of grind. And then after the 4 years of grind, and I'd been boxing for 4 years by then as well. So 4 years boxing from 96 to 2000, writing about amateur shows. 2000 to 2004, busting my butt in America, working in the gyms, doing everything I could, whether it was training with fighters, whether it was training to be a fighter, whether it was doing bits for new websites that were starting to sprout out and doing bits of writing. Whether it was carrying spit buckets, cleaning gyms, whatever I could do. And that was 2000 to 2004. And then I got back to the UK, got a staff job as a news journalist for the Hampshire Chronicle, was doing that by day and then freelancing by night. And for American boxing magazines, I was doing a lot of the UK stuff. So a lot of Hatton and Kawasaki stuff for places like Boxing Digest and Ring Sports and stuff. And then I got my staff job at Boxing News in 2007, became the editor in 2010, left there in 2015, and then started work for BT in about 2018. And so, it's funny now because in today's day and age, it's something I'm really keen to sort of teach my son, who's now 15. So how old are you, Fred?
17. I just turned last month.
Oh, congrats. So it's something I'm keen to show my son, because in today's day and age, a lot of people would give up, like where I was struggling from until I joined the staff at Boxing News. And I started there at the bottom job.
It was really easy to give up because the hardest part of doing interviews is actually getting the interviews. In a way, the interview is the easy part in the way because you've done your research, done all the notes. Yeah, the hardest, and make sure they turn up, because I don't know, be rude to the boxers, but lots of the time they might forget or have something on. And so it's like when they're on the screen on the Zoom, that's the easy part in a way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it took 10 years for me to get a staff job though. So and even then I was starting right at the bottom. I left the top job. So I was the editor of a local paper to take the bottom job at Boxing News because I was just so passionate about the business. But I'd obviously tried for 10 years to get a break and to try and get in there. And then it happened, and it was a massive interview process where I ended up having 2 interviews there. I think I want to say they had 4 digits in applications, as in 1,000 or so. And then I think 6 or 10 or so went to interviews, and then they wound it down to a couple of people. And then they offered me the job literally after I left. I left the building that day and I hadn't even got time to get to the train station. They were like, "Can you please take the job?" We did a bit of negotiating there and then, not much, because obviously I was so desperate to get the job. And then they offered me editorial assistant at Boxing News. And but yeah, it had taken 10 years. And you see a lot of people saying, "Oh, I've been working on this since March. I've given this my all since March." And I'm like, I did 10 years. I didn't even get a break. Do you know what I mean? Like, people expect things to happen like that. And hey, if you're lucky and you get a viral clip or whatever, maybe things are going to happen really quickly. But in the social media age, I don't think people are prepared to put in the same amount of grind and graft to get where they need to go. But again, as I said on this Instagram clip a minute ago, or in this Instagram post I put up, I might not have been going anywhere through all this time in America, 2000 to 2004. And since I came back and I didn't have a job and it hadn't got me anywhere really. But in that 4 years of grind, I got loads of experience. Ended up going to loads of fights, meeting loads of fighters, trainers, promoters. So then you talk about contacts. Obviously, I had loads of contacts because I knew loads of people. And it was all from trying to get a break. And even before, so I ended up going to America really because I couldn't get a news job over here. I was buying the Guardian every Monday and Saturday and going through the media Guardian for jobs. And I think in my study, I've got like 150 job rejection letters from all kinds of newspapers. I couldn't even get a work experience placement. I did work experience at the Daily Mail for a couple of months and tried to get a break, but there was even people there working on the news desk for free at the time, and they were staying with friends in London. So they didn't have like any substantial overheads. And I had 2 months there and I sort of tried to, get in there, and I did bits of boxing for them and tiny little bits. Didn't really get a break, but again, it was all good experience and stuff. And I don't regret doing any of that because, like I said, it is all good experience, but it was all bloody hard and nothing happened overnight. It's funny now, I don't even have a job now, Fred. And so people are saying like, "Oh, it's all worth it in the end." I'm like, is it? Still grinding, still just freelancing and trying to sell work and do stuff for the different platforms. And again, you can't rely on anyone, which is, I've got no work with BT, I've got no work with Sky. So I don't do any radio stuff with Talk Sport. I'm not on a retainer anywhere. So, you know, I only get paid for what I do. So it's Ring Magazine, Boxing Scene, Boxing News, the podcast and books. So my fate's in my own hands, which is great in one respect. Also, you don't have the security of having a salary and stuff like that, and holiday pay and all those other cool stuff. So people think you've made it, and you know, you haven't. I'm 42 now and I still don't have a job. So there's pros and cons, but it's not what it's made out to be. Do you know what I mean?
Have you ever thought like, because obviously you've been in the boxing for a very long time, have you ever thought going into management or anything like that? Because obviously you know everything. Because when you've been in boxing that long, like 30 years for it sounds like 20 years, obviously you can have a lot of experience being around boxers, learning about the boxing business. You ever thought about management?
Not really. I mean, that's kind of the reason why the podcast has come about, because Boxing Life Stories is much more about speaking to the fighters and the trainers and the personalities that I want to speak to and spend time with. Whereas the management side of things, you're playing snakes and ladders with your own career as well as other people's. And it's not really for me. That's high risk, low reward, huge stress, and 24/7. And that's not really for me. Now, it's not that I'm not lazy and not that I'm prepared to not pay my dues, but that's not the kind of thing I'm into at all.
Yeah, it's quite a cutthroat business. So
It's also a huge responsibility. If you take a guy, imagine if you've got a guy who's got super talent and he doesn't get the breaks. Like, how bad would you feel that you're his manager?
yeah, the weight's on your shoulders.
There's a lot of there's a lot of responsibility there, and you know I would rather be responsible for myself and not someone else for sure.
Yeah, I see what you mean there. You have like an ABA champion in there, and then if you mess up like one fight, you might have him as his debut fight against a 2-0 fighter, and that 2-0 fighter could end up being quite good. So if you're into boxing life stories, you've been able to speak to loads of people. What have some of your favorite interviews been on there?
Oh, on the podcast. God, there's loads there, Fred.
What's your favorite? Some of the good ones, because favorite's quite
Yeah,
hard. Some of the good ones.
a recent one was a really sad one that I did with Glyn Rhodes. That was only a couple of issues ago, where you know Glyn talked about the tragic death of Scott Westgarth on the night of a fight when he won. If anyone hasn't had the chance to see that on YouTube or listen to it, then that's quite hard hitting. If I go through the list, you know, I've been friends with Mickey Ward for more than 20 years, and Mickey I've spoken to on the podcast. Mickey was great. I went and interviewed Teddy Atlas in his home in Staten Island, and Teddy's great. And I've known Teddy for a number of years. In fact, I was just on his podcast this week, which was great. So those guys in America, I'm friends. You know, Eddie Mustafa Muhammad is a great friend of mine, has been over the years, the former light heavyweight champ. It was great to go out for a coffee with him in Vegas, and we recorded it. And then I've got guys that I've known in this country for years. So Darren Barker, Anthony Croller, all really good, solid guys that I've got a lot of time for, that spent time with me doing the podcast. It's been great. So those are a handful. There's probably way more. Nigel Benn was great. Joe Calzaghe was brilliant. Frank Bruno, awesome. So like all those guys have been top draw with me. Johnny Nelson, Dave Coldwell. Like there's some absolute bangers in there. Even if I can't say even if I say so myself, because they're the guests. It's all about them. They're the guys that make it good.
What about Barry Hearn? You haven't mentioned Barry Hearn.
Barry was right up there. Do you know, I have never done a long sit down with Barry before, and it was the first time. In fact, he got his. You ask how you get in touch with these people. Barry was nominated for an OBE, and so was Curtis Woodhouse actually. So they were both on the New Year's Honours list. And a few days before they were announced, they both messaged me and said, "Can we do a Boxing Life Stories?" Which is great. So 2 out of 2 on the New Year's Honours list contacted me and said, "Can we do it?" And I was like, "Well, that's great." Only just got round to doing Curtis, who was another great one, by the way. But Barry was brilliant, and his stories about Eubank, and he's just got such a good character. And I remember there, I was interviewing him and speaking to him about Eddie and Eddie's impressions, which have obviously gone viral. And I said, "Oh, Barry, have you got a Eubank impression?" He said, "No." And I was like, "Oh, what do you think when Eddie does it?" And he said, "No, I haven't got an impression. I think it's disrespectful." And I said, "Oh, what do you think when Eddie does it?" He says, "I think it's hilarious," which is probably how everyone sees it. Really, it's a bit disrespectful, but it's bloody funny.
Yeah, I mean Barry, he's playing for the over 70s cricket
I
team.
know we spoke about it. I went to the fight camp thing this week, and he spoke about it. He's loving it, and he was hilarious about that as well. He's got a great sense of humor and a great storyteller. But yeah, he's absolutely loving the cricket.
Oh, were you there at the media thing the other day?
Yeah, it was, yeah, on the Monday, yeah.
I was told that since the COVID, you're not allowed anyone else to the capacity for that, so it's a bit annoying because everyone that's the gold. You hit the blue and treasure chest when you go there because everyone is there.
Well, like I said, Fred, 25 years down the line, mate, you'll be there. I mean, I might be in a hole in the ground, but you'll be there. And, you just got to stick with it because the opportunities will come along.
Yeah, 25, 25 years is a very long time. Blimey, not even 20 years old yet. All right, Tris, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. So your book, you've written quite a few books. The Floyd Mayweather one, his most recent one. Where can people find all of those? Have you got a website or Amazon?
No, yeah, just on Amazon, all that stuff. So I did Ricky Hatton's book, War and Peace, with him. I wrote The Road to Nowhere and Money about Floyd Mayweather, and then obviously Damage. Yeah, they're all up on Amazon.
Yeah, I put the most recent one. I put the link in the description for that. All right, Tris, thank you so much for your time, mate.
All the best for the future, Fred. If I can do anything to help, apart from raiding my contacts book, just let me know.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thank you so much, mate.
All right, bye bye.